Hey everyone, Duke Nuke 3D here with another mask to review for you guys, and this is one of many masks that I have received off of Moulage since yesterday. So, without further ado, here we have a United States M1A2 service mask from the 1930s and 20s. This one is in complete mint unissued condition. It's getting very hard to find these in this shape. They do occasionally appear in this condition, but it is getting harder to find them for a decent price, whereas this one I'd pretty much gotten for free due to, well, I'm probably going to be ending up paying for it eventually, but, you know, it is what it is for now. But anyways, into the history. So, the M1 series service mask started off with the Copps, Tissot, and Monroe mask, which was developed in October of 1918 by Randolph Monroe and Waldemar Copps, who had, the latter of whom would have previous experience designing masks for the U.S. military during World War I. The Copps, Tissot, Monroe arrived too late in the war to be of any use or to see any service. They were planning to mass produce them for the proposed 1919 offensive, which would obviously never come to fruition. So the KTM post-war was reconfigured as the M1 service mask. The main differences between the KTM and the M1 being that overall the same M1 chest carrier and M1 blue felt filter were retained. However, the more rounded angle tube assembly was changed to this more subdued and elongated version seen on the M1 series. The lenses, which were the earlier pressed KT type, were changed to a more... They were pretty much the same design, except on the M1 service mask, they were a bit more elongated. They had a much... more distended platform instead of being directly stamped onto the mask. Excuse me. So, really not all that much changed from the original KTM. They they also might have upgraded the internal deflector tubes as well, which I'll get into in a moment, because the one on my M1A1 is pretty much the same as the ones on a M1 service mask. So, with the M1, they went through a lot of different design changes and revisions, mostly regarding the filter and the carrier. There was a slew of different filters that they had paired with the M1 service mask when it was adopted for service in 1921. Later on in the mid-20s, it was upgraded as the M1A1. The main difference between the M1 and the M1A1 being that the lenses were a threaded type rather than being permanently pressed into the facepiece, so that the lenses were replaceable. That being said, the M1A1 was pretty much used all throughout until the middle of World War II, alongside the the M1A2, which had been introduced in the latter half, or the earlier half of the 1930s, which was overall the same as the M1A1, other than the fact that it was produced in a standard universal size rather than a numeric size system, as you can see here, and the facepiece shape was altered slightly, with the harness tabs or the buckle tabs being sewn on in a slightly different configuration. Other than that, pretty much the same mask. And let's get into the review itself. So why don't we start with this packing slip here, which pretty much dates exactly when this mask was packaged. I'm not sure when it was exactly manufactured, but it was packaged in 1933. You have gas mask service M1A1 4-3. The 4 refers to the canister and the 3 refers to the carrier. So I have a M4 canister and an M3 carrier. Not really much else to see because I'm a dumb retard that can't read cursive very well. So why don't we move on to the next component. Here we have the face form for the mask, which would have set in with the chin here and the rest of the face here. These early face forms are interesting because, as you can see, it is made out of a chromed steel. It is starting to rust a little bit here, but overall it is very decent shape. Got a little bit of deforming and bending, but whatever, it is what it is. It's a nice example of an early face form for these masks. Here you have the packing cord that would have been on the face form, holding it around the lenses and into the mask. Here you have the hose guard, which is a little sleeve which fits over the hose to prevent the flutter valve from crushing the hose while in storage. Although more often than not, these are known to collapse the hoses. In fact, it's a little bit soft right here, a little bit softer than the rest of the hose, but we'll get into that in a moment. Let's see what else. Get all that out of the way. We have the anti-dimming stick, which is particularly interesting because, as you can see, this is marked for a Tissot type mask. A lot of these Tissot anti-dimming sticks were recycled into the M1 series, which is really interesting because this was really at a point in America's history where having a Tissot a mask with TSO deflectors wasn't really all that of a spectacular thing. We were sort of getting out of that era of mouthpieces and nose clips, and it's like, okay, we're making masks with TSO deflectors, and it's kind of interesting that they would recycle these proprietary anti-dimming sticks, but again, these are the exact same anti-dimming sets that would have been with the AT and KT masks, as well as the KTM, obviously. Why don't we get the elephant in the room out of the way, which is the hefty tin that this came in, which has not been opened by me. I'd like to go on record to say this was opened some time ago by Moulage, but it has everything. And as you can see on the top there, MAT, gas mask, service, I assume M1 would be over here, and then M1A1, or just M1A1 4, 3, so again, M4 filter, M3 carrier, size 2, and then the lot number, and then packaged in 1933, as you can see. Let's get onto the carrier, which again is the M3 carrier, which is definitely earlier than any of the other kidney bag carriers that I've had. Not really much to see. You got a US stamp there. The bottom is particularly rounded as opposed to the more squared off and trapezoidal shaped bottoms on the other M4 and M4A1 carriers that I have. It is made of a much thicker, durable canvas. It's very stiff and rigid, and I think they did it this way simply because they later on made it out of a softer canvas, but just put reinforcements in the back. So I kind of prefer that design over this. It's very stiff, and I can imagine this would have been kind of troublesome to fumble with in a gas attack. Here we have the carrying strap, something really too interesting to see out of the ordinary. You do have a marking here that says read canister label before using, and I'll get into that in a moment. You have the size of the mask stamped right there, and hopefully the camera shadow isn't obscuring too much. Opens with 2 lifted dots as per usual. And then on the inside there really isn't too much to see. You got the canister webbing in there, and the sleeve for the anti-dimming stick is nice and beefy as opposed to the later ones that was just a little loop of that webbing. With this one they made out of the strapping material, which is interesting. And now let's get onto the mask itself without further ado, starting with the M4 filter here. As you can see, it says U.S. Army canister, and it goes through a list of things for what not to use this filter for. For instance, ammonia, carbon monoxide, for fighting fires, etc. So yeah, this is a really nice example of a pretty early U.S. gas mask filter. This is before the more common M4A1 filter, or no, excuse me, M9A1. So this is a very early filter. Most of the heavyweight canisters that you'll see are M9A1, or in some cases M9A2, like I have with my M3A1. On the bottom here you can see the inlet valve, which is, again, a very early style, and it's also somewhat small. And what's also interesting is this tape around the top of the canister, which I'm not sure if this is what's holding it together, but it's just kind of interesting. I never understood why they did that. Then you have the aluminum angle joint assembly right there, leading to the 27-inch, I believe this would still be classified as an M2 hose, so I'm pretty sure this is an M2 hose. And then the face piece itself, which is made out of a flat piece of molded rubber, which is covered in stockinette, and then it was sewn at the chin and then covered with fabric tape. You got the nice US stamp on the forehead there, and you got a nice 6-point harness leading to the M2 harness with the head pad there. This is a fairly early one because you can see the felt material in between is a sort of pink color. It's usually gray on later examples. I'm not sure why this is. You can see the nice lot number on the chin piece there, and you can also get a good view of the chin seam on the mask, and you can very just faintly see the outline of the stitching underneath the fabric tape there. And you can also see how the flutter valve is perfectly intact, perfectly flexible, very soft, and it's has its cardboard retainer or packing form to make sure that it does not get deformed. You get a good profile of the angle tube there, very good condition overall. The lenses have a little bit of darkening worn off of them, but they are fully serviceable, and they can be unscrewed, like so. As you can see, the lens will simply come right out, and then there is an orange rubber gasket on the inside there, which can simply be reversed and placed back in. Lenses don't take up the entirety of that space, they just sort of jiggle around there, but no matter. The actual threaded lens portion here is what makes the seal, so that's all that it needs to be honest. And that's pretty much all there is to see externally, so I will take it off the head here and show you the interior of the mask. So give me a moment to invert the harness. There's nothing too interesting to see on the inside, because again, this is a fairly early mask. fairly basic, and it really doesn't have all that much spectacular features. So, without further ado, here's the inside of the mask, which, as you can see, is made out of this strange brownish red rubber. It has the very large and beefy TSO deflectors, which are sort of an interesting design takeaway from later or even earlier masks where it was two separate tubes. This is basically the same deflector assembly as would be used on the M1 service mask, where it is a much larger, beefier pouch, which, as you can see, is basically a cone. It's like a large triangular cone shape that they sort of fold in on itself, and you can see the inlet port at the for the angle tube at the bottom there. And yeah, and you have these little deflector wings which hold it in place on the mask. And you can see how it's taped at the bottom there, and then there's the outlet port just in front of that. You can see a lot number 10 stamped on the right deflector wing, and you can see a manufacturing stamp. It's sort of been cut off. I see TR Co. It looks like there was a letter before that, so I don't exactly know who made this example. It would be helpful if that stamp wasn't off-center, and you see there's lot 22. And I doubt you can see this on camera, but there is an ever so slight texturing of the rubber. This is sort of like a predecessor to World War II masks, and so how they textured the rubber on the inside. Here they didn't do it as much. It's just very subdued, just little tiny dots kind of strewn all throughout the interior. It's very interesting. And you can also see there is, or hopefully you can, there is a number 2 stamped on the inside just in case the outer markings get worn off. And you can see how the chin seam runs through the inside of the facepiece. And despite how simple it is, it's actually quite a comfortable mask. I've actually put it on, yes, for lack of better filter safety. But yes, it's a very nice mask and would have done its job well for the time. However, it was probably this point we had developed injection molded masks, so this mask was really on its last legs. That being said, that is pretty much all there is to see with my mint condition M1A1 service mask. I don't really see too many of these masks reviewed on eBay, I mean on YouTube, excuse me. So I hope you all enjoyed and got a chance to see this particularly uncommon setup. So that being said, I've got plenty more masks to review in the upcoming weeks, so I'm Duking with 3D. If you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.